Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. The Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development was supposed to be here herself, but then she had some other engagement. She wanted to be here to listen to the presentation. So the name is Wisdom Akpalu, and I have just been appointed to chair the Governing Council of the Fisheries Commission of Ghana. Okay.
Governing Council of Ghana's Fisheries Commission. He is a professor of economics at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration and the director of the Environment for Development Initiative for Ghana, which is funded by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. He is also the president of the board of directors of EFD Africa Hub, the chair of the coordinating committee of the 12 EFD centers, and a member of the EFD advisory board. He is the inaugural president of the African Association of Environmental Resources.
So first of all, I just want to give you an overview of Ghana, since I'm going to talk about Ghana. So Ghana, as you all know, is in West Africa, and it is a developing country with per capita income, meaning dividing the size of the economy by the people of the country, comes down to about $2,000 plus a year. But then if we look at natural assets, renewable and non-renewable resources, biodiversity, if you put those things together as capital and you divide it by the number of people or Ghanaians, you come to a figure that is around $5,600. Now, like a typical developing country, Ghana faces food insecurity and food poverty challenges. As you can see, about 45% of Ghanaians depend on agriculture, farming, cultivation of crops, rearing a few livestock. And food inflation is quite high in Ghana. Food inflation is about 61%. As of 2023, it was about 61%. And inflation is just how price levels are rising over time. And about 42% face food insecurity. Now, again, Ghana's import is about 23% of the size of the economy, meaning 1 out of 5 of what we produce, or the GDP of the nation, comes from import, and food constitutes about 50% of those imports. Now, fish. Ghana imports about 60% of the fish that we consume locally. 60%, meaning that we are only able to produce about 40% of the fish that we consume within the country. And of the 40%, a proportion comes from aquaculture, and the rest come from capture fisheries or wild fish stocks. So, to give you an overview of what pertains or what relates to our fisheries in Ghana, we have capture fisheries, and then we have aquaculture. Aquaculture started very small. In fact, by the year 2000, the whole experiment started in the 1950s, 1953 thereabout. But it never took off. By the year 2000, aquaculture production as a proportion of total fish production in Ghana was less than 1% by the year 2000. But by 2023, the figure has gone up to about 19%, almost 20%. So capture fisheries now is about 81%, and fish that we farm, which is typically tilapia and catfish, is about 20% of our total production. Now, we generate about $1 billion a year from fish in revenue. Our fish, meaning we have both small-scale fishing medium and large scale fishing, and we generate about $1 billion in total. And if you look at the size of the economy, fish constitutes about 1%. But then that is the catch. But when fish is caught, it is processed. In Ghana, especially when it comes to marine fishing, men go on the fishing expedition, women don't fish. But then the women engage in buying and processing the fish and selling. And then that is about 3 times what the men make from directly catching the fish. So if we add that to what we get directly from catching the fish, it will be about 4%, thereabout. Now, 60% of our animal protein comes from fish. So anything that happens to fish has direct impact on our animal protein consumption. But it will interest you to know that, as I indicated, we import about 60% of the fish that we consume. We are only able to produce 40% locally. And of that 40, aquaculture is about a fifth of that. But the import together with what we produce locally constitute about only 50% of what we are supposed to be consuming. So according to the WHO estimates, per capita fish consumption, each individual on average in Ghana is supposed to consume about 40 kilograms of fish a year because there is lack of other forms of protein. But then we are only able to consume about a half of that, about 20 or 19, 20 kilograms per person per year. In fact, meaning that if the imports are not there, we will be consuming much, much, much less. And there is a reason why I'm emphasizing that. We also know that, in fact, the fishery sector generates a lot of employment. About 20%, 1 out of every 5 in the active labor force is engaged in fishing. Therefore, anything that happens to the fishing industry has serious implications for national security, because the youth, a lot of the youth, 20% are engaged in fishing and fishing related activities. So that is how important the fishery sector is. Now, catch levels have been declining. We all know there are some challenges within the sector. Catch levels within the marine space have been declining. If you take, for example, the artisanal fishing sector, if you compare, let's say, 1994 thereabout to current extractions per canoe, the catch levels are reduced by more than 40% within that span, that period. Because the fisheries are managed as open access. If you are a Ghanaian, you can acquire boats and go out to fish the next day. There is no restriction on entry. So because of the open access nature of fisheries, the fishery is overcapitalized. There are too many vessels or too many canoes that we need. Actually, we have somewhere between 12,000 and 14,000 canoes that are currently fishing in our waters. But to optimize rent, to get the maximum economic benefit from the fisheries, we need about 8,000 to 9,000 canoes, which means that we have so much in excess given the level or the type of technology they currently use. And that has led to overfishing and biological overexploitation of the stock. And there is the fear that if nothing is done, the stock could potentially collapse. Then we also have intense IUU activities. So the IUU is not only by artisanal vessels. The artisanal fishers, some of them use lights. We call them light aggregation devices. So they drop light in the ocean when the moon is out, and the fish come to surround the light, and then they catch them. So that is illegal, but then it's quite rampant. Then we also have the use of dynamite. Sometimes when the fish aggregate, they blow them up and collect them. And then we have other destructive fishing methods, such as the use of very small mesh sizes of 1 millimeter in straight, 10 millimeters in straight diagonal, when the approved mesh size is about 25 millimeters in straight diagonal. So these are the IU practices among the artisanal vessels, or the artisanal fleet, which is the canoes that are used to fish. And then among the industrial vessels, we also have a lot of IUU activities. In Ghana, we have the trawlers. That trawl, and we all know the challenges with trawling, destroying the benthic floor of the ocean, which is one of the the negative impact of trawling. But then besides that, the trawlers are licensed to catch what we call bottom-dwelling stocks, the Nimasa stocks. But for a very extended period of time, these trawlers were targeting small pelagic species. These are anchovies, mackerel, and sardines. So these are species that are supposed to be targeted by artisanal fishers or small-scale fishers, but the trawlers were targeting those species and harvesting them in very large numbers. On a particular year, 2017, when a study was done, the quantity of fish that was landed was valued between $50 million and $80 million for that particular year. So it is massive, and that has caused a significant reduction in those stocks, and that is having an implication on the availability of food or catch for the artisanal communities. In fact, for the artisanal communities, over 80% of them only depend on fishing. They don't have any other alternative or supplementary livelihood. So if they are not able to get catches, it directly affects their food consumption, it affects their livelihood directly, both men and women. But in addition to these human factors, we also have exogenous factors or factors that are outside the control of the fishers, and these are mostly climate related factors such as rising sea temperature. There was a study we did some time ago that clearly shows that the sea temperature together with the variation in the sea temperature actually impact catches. So the rising sea temperature is a problem. Then we have rising or increasing salinity levels, and we also have low upwellings, which are all working against yield and catches and food availability to the fishing communities. What are the implications of this? We know that because of the challenges within the fishery sector, we have low protein intake. So fishers or Ghanaians are eating less and less fish. And as I indicated, if you look at 2006, for example, each person was consuming about 26 kilograms per person per year. But now it is around 19 kilograms per person per year. So there's a significant reduction. And even with that, we are far short of the 40 kilograms that is estimated by the WHO. And then we have high fish importation cost. So because the quantity that we produce is declining, we have to import. And if we farm fish, we have to import the feed. A lot of the feed is imported. So we pay a lot of money importing feed for fish that we farm, and we also pay a lot of money just to import the fish, about $145 million or so a year. Then we have poor health, and maybe this is where you come in, because if children, women are not eating enough protein, it has implications for health. Now, besides fishing, we know that our oceans provide additional benefit, right? So, for example, issues of transportation, we import a lot, so the ports are very busy. So, for example, in 2023, it's estimated that the imports were about 26 million tons. And also there are potentials for hydrocarbon, about $4.8 billion of oil extracted and exported. Then there is huge potential for tourism. It is estimated that over the next 10 years, Ghana can make about 10 billion from tourism. So these are potential benefits, and it can create so much jobs besides the fishing. Then, on the issue that myself and Dr. Dolan discussed, I just decided to put this slide in. The question is, we are all now talking about transitioning to green shipping, green energy. And the question is, what will be the implication of that? I think it will be very interesting for us to do some simulations to try to determine what the implications are that for communities or for developing countries like Ghana, where we depend so much on import, as you can see from the statistics. So we all know that transition to green fuel is very costly. And there are estimates, I don't know how far this is true, I'm sure there are some experts here that says that if we transition, we are likely to increase the cost by 3 to 4 folds. In 2022, just a marginal increase in the cost of shipping actually led to a significant reduction in imports, which means that if the cost increases and imports decline, including fish imports, this will have a huge impact on especially those at the tail end of the social structure when it comes to those who are living on hand to mouth, or those who are struggling, those who are poor, those who are food insecure. They'll be the ones who will suffer most. So we need to worry about that. There will be food inflation will be higher because it's now at 61%. We expect that prices of food will be much higher than it would be if we transition without taking care, especially on low-income households. We will have elevated levels of food poverty. We've done studies that have shown that even when we close the season for artisanal fishers for just 1 month, there's a lot of things that happen. Their food consumption declines. The variation or the diversity of food also is affected, and multidimensional food poverty is significantly affected. So if the cost is high and we import less, we expect that all those unfavorable indicators will come to play. And of course, as I said, we will have an increase in multidimensional poverty, which means the quantity of food they eat, the quality of food they eat, and other psychosocial dimensions of food will be impacted significantly if we transition without care. So with this, I think I'll say thank you.
That was a bit chilling. Some of the things that you shared were quite revolutionary. I want to welcome you all again to this event. Thank you so much for still hanging in there despite some of the challenges that we've had. We're now going to move to the panel session, which I think everybody has been looking forward to. And just before we dive straight in, I wanted to say a couple of things, but I don't think we need that. We have experts here to do that. As I said before, my name is Dola Olute. I'm a senior research fellow in energy and transport policy at the University College London. And I also am part of a group called the Patna Group. It's called Professional Africa Technical Network and Advisory. And I'm happy to say that Prof said yes to me to join that growing group. There are about 140 members as we speak. And Professor Apalo would be one of the people in the steering committee. So we're looking forward to your adding your brilliance to what we're trying to achieve for Africa. So without further ado, we'll hop right into the panel session. And to kick us off is Dr. Anika Frosh. She's my colleague at University College London, but she also has a lot more things which I would share with you. So Dr. Anika is a research fellow with the UCL, University College London Shipping and Oceans Research Group. Her work focuses on ocean governance and policy, with particular attention to the decarbonization of the shipping industry. I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I find it difficult to follow lines. Currently, she's following the negotiations at the International Maritime Organization, analyzing the dynamics between different levels of governance and the roles of specific country groups. Anika also continues to research ocean acidification, a topic she began during her master's studies and explored it in depth during her PhD dissertation at the European University Institute. Her doctoral research funded by the German Academic Exchange Service, examined governance solutions to address complex scientific realities of ocean acidification. And a monograph based on her dissertation is forthcoming with Cambridge University Press. So something for you to write down and look out for. Her research is distinctly interdisciplinary, integrating insights from law, natural sciences, and political science. Methodologically, she draws on in-depth case studies and has conducted interviews with key organizations in the field. Anika has been a visiting scholar at institutions in the US, that is UCD, UK, which is UCL, and Singapore, NUS. She has contributed to the academic community through teaching roles at the School of Transnational Governance, the University of Tübingen, and Wageningen University. In addition, she serves as an assistant editor at the Transnational Environmental Law. Please help me make Anika welcome as she comes to share with us.
Maybe. That's it. Perfect.
And so I'm just going to be keeping track of time. So
I can't see you
okay.
because I'm
So
looking against the light.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm
that's
sorry.
fine. Yes. Just to give us some indication, our ground rules for each panelist is that each panelist has 7 minutes for insights, and everyone will have 7 minutes per presentation, either screened or not, and will keep us ruthlessly on time. Over to you.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Dola. So I will be talking about the impacts of shipping and maritime activities on the environment specifically, and also a little bit about human health. And I think you will find some themes that we've already heard about from the previous speakers. I want to kick us off with this quote by Hugo Grotius. He said this in his book Mare Liberum, or The Freedom of the Seas, in 1609. And he says, "For the same reasons, the sea is common to all, because it is so limitless that it cannot become a possession of any one, and because it is adapted for the use of all, whether we consider it from the point of view of navigation or fisheries." I've chosen this quote because I feel like it's still, unfortunately, really up to date. I think not much of how we understand or think about the oceans has changed since then, even though many years have gone by since 1609. But I think we often think of the ocean as something that is limitless, that everyone can just use, that is so vast that we can't barely understand it, and that when we pollute it, for example, it will just disperse and we won't really see it. I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that's not true, and I'm at the right conference to speak about this, but this has to go way further than this. So when we talk about maritime activities and about shipping, there's many different sources of pollution, and I can hardly cover them all in this presentation. And so I've tried to cover some of them with this slide. And my background, as you've heard by Dola, I'm working on ocean acidification, so this might be a bit biased, and I might be leaning into that a little bit. But as you can see on the ship side of things, I've tried to capture that in this photo, we of course have emissions from CO2, from NOx, and from SOx. And all of those emissions lead to ocean acidification. So the ones from CO2 are being absorbed by the ocean directly, and those from NOx and SOx are being washed out through acid rain. We also have, in particular, SOx coming into the ocean through scrubbing, which is a cleaning technique, I shall say, through exhaust gas cleaning systems. So instead of releasing it into the atmosphere, those SOx are being washed, acid washed into the ocean water. So also that leads to ocean acidification in these local areas, and specifically in shipping lanes and ports. We also have all sorts of other pollution from ships, and you see a plastic bottle here, but we all know that's not the only source. There's obviously oil, there's noise, that's not really talked about very often. And it says nutrition here, it's supposed to say nutrients, that are also polluting the ocean, and they lead to eutrophication as well as to ocean acidification. And then we've already heard from the professor about fishing and overfishing specifically, that of course leads to an additional stressor on the oceans. And the more we overfish, the more the genetic pool shrinks. So if there are all these different stressors, it's really difficult for species to adapt to the next stressor that we're putting on it. So overfishing is a huge risk for the genetic pool that we're working with. And then on the land side of things, for example, in a harbor, we also have pollution, all sorts of pollution, the same ones that we have on the ship and others. We have nutrients that come from urbanization and the harbor section itself, and then we also have NOx, SOx, CO2, and of course other greenhouse gases. So you can really see this is quite a complex problem, unfortunately, because we have all these sources of pollution coming from different areas. So we have the land, we have the atmosphere, we have the ship itself. So it's not just the ocean, essentially. We really have to think about all of these different sources. So what does this mean now, and what does this mean for human beings? So I've borrowed the slides from the Ocean Acidification Alliance, and it really shows the different impacts and what they lead to when it comes to, in particular, ocean acidification, but also other things. You can see 93% of heat has been absorbed by the ocean already, and 30%, and I think this is an old number, it's actually more, of carbon emissions. So the ocean has been working for us, and while we're polluting and emitting, and climate change is happening, the ocean has really prevented a lot of it for us, which is not really often talked about, and I know it's becoming sort of the part of the ocean as a solution conversation. So what does this all mean for human beings? So essentially, climate change and the pollution we're putting on the ocean is putting ecosystem services, that's what we call for everything that the ocean is kind of doing for us human beings, at risk. And it's specifically when it comes to food and nutrition. And we've already heard about the situation in Ghana, but we can say that the aquatic food consumption has quintupled in the past 60 years. So our reliance on food from the ocean has never been higher, according to FAO data from 2022. And ocean acidification, together with other ocean stressors, according to the IPCC from 2022 as well, can say with high confidence that there's already food affected from the ocean and food production, including aquaculture and fisheries, and that's because of warming together with ocean acidification. Deoxygenation and ocean acidification together threaten essential seafood species. For example, we have shellfish, we have crabs and lobsters and shrimps and so many other species that are already affected, and of course the biodiversity of the ocean itself. So all these different things together really threaten commercial fishing, but also recreational subsistence fishing and farming of the different aquaculture, as for example is the case in Ghana. We also know that by 2050, coral reefs won't be able to produce their structures anymore as fast because of ocean acidification and deoxygenation at the same time, because they don't have carbonate ions anymore that they can use to build their structures as so many other species that rely on those. And that means that a lot of the habitat is getting lost as well. So especially when it comes to the smaller scale fisheries, we're really relying on coral reefs and these areas to fish, and those won't be there anymore, or at least weakened extremely. Ocean acidification and deoxygenation together also lead to a lower growth rate in species. So even if we do get to fish species, the individuals that we're fishing will be much smaller, so less food is available and there's a higher risk for nutrition as well. There are many other, and I can go on, effects of climate change on the ocean, and some of them have to do with taste as well, and some of them have to do with nutritious potential of different species as well, that are not even all really completely understood, because we're still discovering the intersection of different stressors and those impacts on the ocean and on different species. So why am I talking about this today is because 70% of the research that is being done currently is happening in the global north, and specifically in the United States, in Europe, and in Canada. So there's very little information about the species and ocean acidification and warming, for example, in Africa. And what are those impacts of coastal acidification, of shipping by harbors, but also of, for example, acidification at large. So which species will be particularly at risk in the African region or continent, and how can Africa prepare and adapt to this situation is really not very well known. So much more funding is needed for research and understanding the situation in Africa for fishermen and fisherwomen there. So that's all I'm going to say, and if you have any questions, I believe there will be some time for that later on. Thank you.
A huge round of applause for Dr. Nika. Thank you so much for that. And next is another one of my colleagues, I'm proud to say. I have grown a little bit fond of him because he did me a favor. And as an African woman, yes, it makes your heart warm. So I will be bringing up stage Dr. Jomagoy Barisic. Jomagoy is a senior research fellow at the University College London Energy Institute. Jomagoy focuses on the intersection of the marine environment, society, and technology to understand sustainability transitions. He uses mixed research methods to explore the nature of transition pathways necessary to reach a low carbon shipping future. His research interests span policy, political, economic, and socio-technical transitions. He developed the SDF conceptual framework with the aim of making sustainability transitions literature more empirically suitable for the study of fuel transitions in shipping. Jomagoy holds a PhD in energy and transport from UCL. In addition to his PhD, he holds an MPhil in environmental policy and an MA Cantab in natural sciences, both from the University of Cambridge. Prior to joining UCL, Jomagoy worked for several years in the private sector as an analyst looking at policy and financial drivers shaping global energy markets and emissions trading. Let us give him a warm welcome as he comes to share his presentation. We can do better than that.
First of all, until we get ready, a warm round of applause for Dola for organizing this event, and thank you for the kind words as well. This is my practice without you, so excellent. I think to start off, really, we had three excellent speakers before me, and I think this really touches upon them. So we heard Annika just before me talk about the different levels of environmental challenges facing the marine environment and how they interact with human health and how they interact with basically sustainable development as well. Then we heard Pastor Peters really show us an impactful speech in many different ways, but from what I took from it for this specific presentation is the interconnectedness between the different stakeholders and the different communities when we're talking about decarbonization, we're talking about how do we move forward. And finally, Professor Abkal mentioned a really important point that, well, we're going towards this decarbonization journey. We will decarbonize shipping, or we're planning to, hopefully, and we will use these fuels, and they have repercussions. So I'm not going to give you the answer because I don't think I know it yet. If I did, probably wouldn't be standing here. But at the same time, I will try giving you some questions around that answer. So when we talk about the energy transition and Africa, I think we're talking about, we just came out of the IMO process where there was been discussion about adoption of something called Z&Z, zero and near zero net zero fuels. And with that, some of the questions are important for Africa, but I mean globally important as well, is how do we define what these fuels are? And that is very important because once we decide how do we define them, or once the member states decide upon this, then we will know how to decarbonize further. And the definition is key, because if you define them as being one way or another, it will affect where they come from, it will affect how they're produced, and it will affect who makes the most out of them in terms of financial gain, but also in terms of minimizing biodiversity loss, etc. So, I mean, an example would be, do we define them as being purely green fuels, fuels that are hydrogen derived, fuels that come from renewable electricity? In which case, where does this electricity come from? Is that electricity competitive? From the perspective of Africa, is there enough sustainable resources to produce perhaps some of those fuels domestically and potentially export some of those fuels more globally as well? If we define them another way and say they're, as sometimes called, blue fuels, if they include fuels that are based on fossil fuels originally. Well, how can we be sure that the life cycle emissions of those fuels are actually taken into account, but also where do we actually see the carbon capture and storage for those fuels coming from? So it's another question about sustainability. And then finally, some people argue we should include biofuels in that as well. And that's a question about food security. It's a question of, well, okay, perhaps it's cheaper to do than some of the other alternatives, but at the same time, where will we produce those fuels? Will that affect crops? Will it be scalable? And how would it have long-lasting repercussions on the continent, on the people living there, and on our future as a whole as well? And then finally, what other effects do we have to consider? None of these are without risks, none of these are without challenges. And some of my panelists afterwards will touch upon some of these issues to do with sustainability of these fuels, with air pollution issues of these fuels. I think Maria will touch upon that a bit as well afterwards. So there is those considerations to do as well. So once we talk about that transition and how do we go alongside that transition, well, where are we now? We're in 2025. We're talking about by 2050 to fully decarbonize shipping. Now that's 25 years in the future. Now, I remember living in the year 2000. It doesn't feel that long ago. I mean, if I ask some of my younger colleagues, I mean, they're probably going to tell me I'm a bit old by saying that, but I remember being there. And so 25 years in the future is not that long in the future. So we're talking about a rapid scale up of these fuels. We're going through these phases quite quickly along something called an S-curve trajectory. And we're talking about rapid investment in scaling up of infrastructure for both supply, for demand, for the construction of new ships, and for the financiers to come in and finance this transition. And what does that mean in terms of the African continent? Well, it poses one serious challenge. Will this transition take place, and who will reap the benefits from it? And this is where you have to be really cognizant of the fact that it is very important that the bunkering infrastructure, fueling infrastructure for these fuels, that the production and that the financial benefits of those are spread equally and equitably around the world. And that is something that in the past has not always happened. And that's a lesson we have to learn, and especially when countries go into the IMO negotiations, a lesson they have to build onto. And so that also touches upon all these environmental benefits of air pollution, of production factors for these fuels. Can we produce them effectively? Fuels such as ammonia have safety concerns. Fuels such as biofuels, as I mentioned, have concerns about food production. But other fuels such as methanol have different types of concerns, in some cases also air pollution concerns as well. And then how does all of this interact with local communities? Are local communities being consulted when you're creating a huge new plant to produce these fuels? How will this affect their livelihoods? How will it affect their way of living and moving and creating sustainable communities into the future? So some of the analysis that we do at UCL and that we look at is trying to understand the close intersection between these different aspects. How do you look at investment in these fuels in combination with the necessary transition that has to take place over a wide range of different stakeholders? How does that take place? And the key here is, it's very complex. I will start from there, but the next step is, well, you can try breaking down by a set of indicators and by a set of what we call levers, and to understand how much on track or not on track we are according to some of these levers. Now, I'm not expecting you to look at this, a lot of text, but what is key to take into account is there's a lot of orange and there's a lot of red, which implies we're not really on track of where we have to be. And this looks at the global north mostly, although it's a global analysis. If you look at the global south, and if you look at least developed countries, and if you look at developing countries, the story is even redder. And that's something that has to change, and that's something that has to change with capacity building, with funding, and with collaboration. And we're not at that stage yet. We're at the stage of actually going in that direction. So for the African consideration and for the development in Africa, I think the key is to understand how can you tap into that significant potential to produce those Z and Z fuels, whilst also ensuring that it is done in a just and equitable manner, and also in a way that actually lifts up people from a less economic development to a higher economic development, and also benefits everyone, which is not just a case in Africa, it's a case everywhere, that you have to understand how can this transition just not decarbonize shipping, but go further than that, and actually touch upon all of these points that we tend to talk about a just and equitable transition. And this is a bit to your right from some of the work I've published a paper about understanding some of these interactions when you're creating that capacity at the local or a subnational level. And the key points usually for that national or subnational action tend to be the interrelationship and interaction between these local levels with the national level. That you have the local actors who are spearheading that transition, that they're working together with national actors, that they're working together within the various classes of R&D, but also in different types of infrastructure contexts and exploiting those local niches for development. And another aspect that I think is key here is to tap into those local characteristics, build on them and explore them. And I can really end this with a sense of optimism. There's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of red, there's a lot of orange, but the pathway towards that S-curve is green, and where better to start than in the continent that is green, Africa. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Yes. I like it when we end in an optimistic way. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for making us more intelligent. The speakers that have spoken, I mean, even I am kind of like just gulping everything, even though they're my colleagues. Right. Next, we have a look into something a little bit different. Now, you've been hearing of IMO. IMO is the International Maritime Organization. For those that don't know, this is a United Nations specialized agency that specializes in safety and security of international shipping. It's been our home for the past few years. And the person I'm just about to call is someone that gets quite very passionate about multilateral diplomacy. And I like listening to her when she talks about this, because you can sense that she really cares that we look at the world as one. And that is really important. And her heart is especially with the developing countries. So I want you to help me welcome Ms. Carleen Wills. Now, Carleen is the Director of Ocean and Climate at the United Nations Foundation, where she leads efforts to advance science-based ocean governance principles in multilateral diplomacy. Her work at UNF plays a pivotal role in strengthening the voices of the developing countries, particularly small island developing states, in advocating for a just and equitable transition of international shipping at the International Maritime Organization, IMO, ensuring that coastal and vulnerable nations help shape global maritime policies. Previously, Will served as Charge d'Affaires at Guyana's permanent mission in Geneva, where she led WTO negotiations on fisheries subsidies on behalf of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the African Caribbean Pacific Group, ACP. She also served as the regional coordinator for the Group of the Americas, GRUA, at the World Health Organization. We've been hearing about WHO here for some time now, helping to guide the regional response to global health challenges, including COVID-19. Can you please help me welcome Ms. Wills as she comes to share with us? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dola, for that introduction. Actually, you make me feel like a lot bigger and important, you know. So thank you so much for that. Is this one?
This one is no.
Okay. So thank you for that, and thank you to my colleagues before, because I think they really set the stage for the discussion that we're going to have, or I'd like to have with you, on multilateral diplomacy and why it's so important for how we shape the discussions on ocean and human health. So the first question I'd like to ask you all is to raise your hand if you still believe in multilateralism. Okay, this is a hopeful community. Okay. I know that a lot has happened, you know, over the past year, where there's a lot of geopolitics that are fraying multilateral discussions. A lot of different things are happening on climate change. The players and the actors are changing in this space. So something that I like to say is that multilateralism is not necessarily dead, but it is evolving, which is great because it allows rise for new voices and new countries to lead. So I hope to walk you through two of my favorite multilateral agreements. My first love, which was the WTO, World Trade Organization Fisheries Subsidies Agreement. And my second love, both competing but still in my heart, is the IMO Net Zero Framework, which we recently worked on. So is that okay with everyone? Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. So I have another question for you. As of today, do you know how many countries have ratified the WTO Fisheries Subsidy Agreement?
No.
Okay, I can tell you, it's 102, and we are only 8 countries away from making that agreement enter into force. And I want to walk you through some of the reasons why this agreement is so important. So the agreement adopted in 2022 is a landmark decision because for the first time at the World Trade Organization, they incorporated environmental justice into a trade agreement. That is unprecedented for what happened at the WTO, and a lot of it happened because of the group of African and Caribbean and Pacific states that came together to ensure that that became an essential part of that agreement. So just to let you know some components of it, and my colleague here spoke on some of the really important parts, that it deals with subsidies to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, subsidies to overfish stocks, and subsidies to fishing in unregulated areas of the high seas. So why is that important for Africa, right? And I think that, we highlighted that when we discussed fisheries, about how interconnected these things are. There is no reason that a government should be providing harmful subsidies or should be subsidizing an industry that is decimating communities. And I'll give you some key statistics for Africa and why this is important. So first off, in Africa, over 200 million people depend on fisheries for their primary protein. In countries like Senegal, 60% to 70% of animal protein comes from fish. And yet over 34% of global fish stocks are overexploited, and the rates are even higher in some of African countries. So one of the things that we saw when we were doing fishery subsidies is that subsidies to overfishing and overcapacity and subsidies that allow these big vessels to trawl out at sea decimated communities in West Africa. And Dola talked about how passionate I get about developing countries. Something had to be done. So this is why this agreement is so essential to limiting the subsidies that contribute to decimating communities. So how does this relate back to human health? Well, I think the connection is quite clear. First of all, if you have these harmful subsidies that allow for you to fish in a stock that's already overfished, or in areas of the high seas, or along the coast of communities, that means that there's no food security. And I talked about the communities that depend on fisheries. It causes job instability. And you create a situation where fisher folk cannot feed families. And this leads to migration crises with communities migrating to different countries. And then you destroy the ecosystem. This destroys ocean health. Trawlers that scrape the bottom of the ocean and absolutely decimate these very beautiful coral reefs and these the underwater sea life. And I think Annika did a really good job at talking about how bad that is for the health of our seas. So immediate action is necessary to make sure that we can cover this and make sure that we are addressing these key issues. So, I recommend ratifying the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement and putting that into place. We're only 8 countries away, and I'm sure that, once we come together as a community, we can really make things happen in a positive way. Okay, so that was my plight for WTO. Ooh, 2 minutes on IMO. I don't know. Second love is not getting that much. Okay. So I and I think it's fine because my colleagues talked a little bit about what happened at the International Maritime Organization and the importance of reducing emissions because of the impact that shipping emissions has on communities. So I guess I can ask you guys another question. Which communities do you think are most impacted by emissions from shipping?
Coastal communities.
Coastal communities.
Quarantine.
Yes, coastal communities and port communities. And I'd like to give you guys some key statistics, particularly for Africa. So the Gulf of Guinea is one of the busiest shipping corridors in the continent, with major ports in Lagos, Abidjan, Dakar, Tema, Douala. I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right, but I'm trying. And shipping emissions account for 40% of the ambient air pollution in port cities like Lagos. So what does that mean for health? Of course, that means you have higher rates of asthma, respiratory system, respiratory infections, lung diseases, strokes, and all of these things are linked back to the emissions from shipping and people living in port communities. So most recently at the IMO, we had an agreement in April, the IMO Net Zero Framework, that was approved and is up for formal adoption in October to reduce emissions in shipping, and my colleagues already talked about the trajectory needed for that. So why is this agreement important? Even though the discussions were very fraught in those negotiations, for the very first time, we had the opportunity to come together as Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific to ensure that the voices of developing countries were heard in those negotiations. And we have an opportunity in October in the discussion of the guidelines and those measures to continue having our voices heard. So this is something that is unprecedented in the context of the IMO, and we're thankful to our colleagues in the Pacific that started this movement, gathered the Caribbean, gathered the African community to make this all possible. So we have to continue this movement in order to ensure the reduction of emissions from shipping and tackle not only the impacts of emissions on human health, but also on ocean health, as my colleagues outlined here. So how will I close? Good question. Me. Why is multilateralism still important, even though it is different? It is important because of the very communities that I talked about. That is one of their main opportunities to have their voices heard on stages where they don't normally get a place. It's their opportunity to stand toe-to-toe with larger countries that don't necessarily hear them. It's their opportunity to come together as a group to let their voices be heard. So even though I know multilateralism is difficult, it's hard, and it's tough at times, and I know my colleagues, we stay up until all hours of the night trying to negotiate an agreement. For me, it means everything to see that these countries get their voices heard. So with that, I ask you, I know I asked a lot of questions, to stay in the room, to push the boundaries, and to believe that cooperation is still our best shot. And this is because multilateralism is not only a way to protect the ocean, but also to protect each other. And I thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. Thank you for also energizing us with your passion and with your brilliance. And we're gradually coming to the end of the panel sessions where they're sharing. And it brings me great pleasure, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. It brings me great pleasure to bring to the stage someone that I've also grown quite fond of. I think I'm fond of everybody in this panel, including Prof. But we recently found out that we are actually birthday buddies. We were born on the same date, maybe not the same year. And so we've grown quite fond of each other. And sometimes we say the same thing at the same time. Please help me welcome Marie Hobatova. Marie is the Director of Global Shipping at the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. based in London. She leads EDF's global strategy to decarbonize the maritime sector, overseeing policy engagement at both the national level and within the International Maritime Organization. Her work includes advancing the use of alternative fuels for shipping, engaging key stakeholders across the sectors, and identifying the most pressing challenges to drive an equitable and effective energy transition in maritime transport. Marie brings over a decade of experience in the non-profit sector, focusing on maritime decarbonization, alternative fuels, carbon pricing, and climate policy. Prior to joining EDF, she worked in academia and has a strong foundation in environmental science and economics. Her main areas of interest include international shipping, environmental justice, and the design of fair and effective environmental policies. She holds a BSc in Public Administration and Regional Development and an MSc in European Agrarian Diplomacy from the Czech University of Life Sciences, as well as an MSc, double whammy, in Environmental Management and Business from Cranfield University. Please help me make Marie welcome.
She gets a hug.
Hey, I'm the favorite. Just saying. Thank you so much, Dola. Thank you so much, all the speakers. It's been overwhelming. This whole week has been quite hard to digest for myself, I have to say. I'll try to close the loop. I think I'll touch on a lot of things the speakers before me mentioned in their presentations. So much me, get on with it. We need to decarbonize shipping. I think we all know it. It's not going to happen anytime soon, I am afraid to say. We need to wait for the policy process to kick in and so on. And I think it's really important to bring the bottom-up action into play. And it's been happening. I think the industry knows it has to happen, and they also know that if they start early on, they will have a first mover advantage. So we have seen many green shipping initiatives popping up around the world. We have, I think, around 70 green shipping corridor announcements so far, but these are happening mostly in the global north because that's where the money is, right? And it's a big mistake, and I'm going to tell you why it is. Shipping decarbonization is being viewed in a very sort of streamlined way, right? We need to bring down the sector's carbon footprint. But as you heard from the speakers before me, it's not just about greenhouse gases, is it? Shipping has many negative impacts on the environment, on biodiversity, on human health. And then also secondary impacts on socioeconomics as well, especially in communities that face all those negative impacts I've just mentioned. And that's where the shipping green initiatives come in place, because they can significantly improve that. And that's why we need to look at not just bringing down emissions, but also what else decarbonizing shipping can bring to all those communities, all those ports, and then really decide where is the best place to spend our money. So to name some of those co-benefits that can be generated by decarbonizing shipping, which ultimately means moving away from fossil fuels, we can get cleaner air, we can get cleaner water, we can get lower level of noise, but we can also provide significant improvement to socioeconomic situation of port communities. And port communities, as we know, are highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change, and often they're the poor ones, right? So when we are making those decisions where where to place our green shipping corridors or make any other clean shipping initiatives. Let's consider what else we can do, what else it can bring beyond just pure decarbonization, because maybe that should not be the highest priority and the other factors should be considered as well. So I think Caroline provided some statistics on ports, but for now I think we have around, so out of the 10 most populous cities in the world, 4 of them are ports. And we have hundreds of millions of people living in ports at the moment. In the next 25 years, we will be looking at somewhere between 2 to 2.5 billion people living in ports. And that's port, we will have 6 points out of those 10 in the most populous cities. And that's ports in Africa and ports in Southeast Asia. Yeah, have you heard what green corridors between these regions? No. If there is a green corridor in Africa, it goes where people have money, right? Global North. So cleaning up shipping in those areas should be a priority. Again, I think we've heard something about how dirty shipping fuel is, so let me get into the nitty-gritty. We all know that conventional bunker fuel we use is a source of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Besides that, it also is a source of carbon monoxide, NOx, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, and unburned hydrocarbon. All of these, yeah, none of us would like to breathe that, I can tell you. All of it has a really bad impact on your cardiovascular and respiratory system. And that's what people in port breathe, unfortunately. So we need to find an alternative, but we should be very careful about what we are considering, because as I think Domagoj mentioned, the fuels that are on the table at the moment, not all of them bring a significant improvement in terms of air pollution. And I think, that's exactly the systemic approach that we should be taking while decarbonizing shipping, because we don't want to keep the air pollution problem, right? We don't want to address just decarbonization. So drop-in biofuels have pretty much the same air pollution profile as conventional bunker fuel, so maybe not the best option, I would say. And then for methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen, it is better. Ideally, we would want to use them in the fuel cells and not burning them in internal combustion engines. And I know that this sounds very negative, but I would say that it's always important to choose the technology that suits the specific place and learn from the technology we have now. Like, we have LNG, we've got bunker fuel. Let's learn from our mistakes and let's learn how to manage those new fuels better so that we don't create further problems to health of port and coastal communities. And let's learn how to manage the risk that arises from them. I think it's also really important for ports to implement measures to bring emission of air pollution down directly in the ports, such as shore power, minimization of idling, electrification of their machinery. I would also like to mention coastal communities, because again, that's hundreds of millions of people who live by the coast. And they I need to be quick. They face similar issues, which doesn't necessarily arise from the big ships that we've been talking about here most of the day, but small ones, those that they use for fishing, for transporting people, for transporting goods. The engines, again, not very clean, but as I mentioned at the beginning, decarbonizing those big ships will take a while. But for the small ones, we have a technology, it exists. We can electrify them in a very efficient and effective way. And this can be done now. those ships are not usually covered by policies to decarbonize shipping, and so they are really sailing under the radar, and it's a huge mistake. It really is such a big opportunity that can improve the life of communities all around the world, and it can be done tomorrow. So to close, I would like to say that it really is important to put our communities first and make sure they are part of the solution, that they co-create the solution, and that we always look at decarbonization in the wider context and think about all the other benefits we can provide instead of creating further issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I were to just summarize what every single person said is from what Marie just ended us up with, which is people's health at the heart of this policy-making discussions, even why we're here. They say oceans are the lungs of the earth, or ocean is the lung of the earth. And that means oceans have been working hard for centuries, for God knows how long the earth has existed. And we're coming to a point where they have become, or they're experiencing existential threats to them, and then by ripple effect to us. And that means if we don't take action now, what we heard Pastor Peters talk about, what nurses and people at the front lines are experiencing, is going to be exacerbated if we don't take action today. And there was something that Marie said, and we've shared this outside of this room, where there is an existing technology today that can literally decarbonize domestic boats. Today, not even tomorrow. It exists. If we have the intention, that I think we do, we can begin to move in that direction. And I will not want to close this whole session without bringing the Director General of Ghana Maritime Authority to share in a very, very short space of time, 2-3 minutes, sir, how, because I would also say that he says that he's a baby at the IMO, but he's a giant in the research space because he's a PhD as well, and he's a practical man. He shared with me how it was on the ground just last week, sir, right? Going around the ports and doing the legwork with the community. And I just had goosebumps. I'm like, yes, this is the type of leadership that we need today. And so, sir, I'm sorry, I know that you'll be blushing if you were white. But I'd like to bring you up to the stage. I love DG so much because I just like it when people do practical leadership and leadership from the front. He leads from the front. So, sir, if you can just come and just encourage us a little bit with what is happening. We've heard some wonderful research outputs and even what's happened at the IMO from our panelists. But can you just share with us how you're beginning to change the trajectory of how GMA have been and to how it is moving right now?
Thank you, Dola.
Dr. Kamal
Yes.
Dean.
You should have simply said a sailor, and that will be much interesting. Thank you, Dola. It was just when I was sitting there that Dola said, you have to say a few words. So I think the first important thing to say is that the work Dola and her colleagues are doing is helping improve understanding, build traction, and what is called a voice for a global South in what is called a multilateral space. As a student of international relations, my stomach went, and the military offside went many ways when that was being mentioned. But that is what it is. So it is so important in that regard to support that kind of work in terms of the knowledge that it brings before. I wouldn't be able to speak too much about the organization, but let me just say that this morning, I was working and trying to edit again, and I've been editing this for the last 3 weeks, send it back to my colleagues, their work, and bring it back to me. A cabinet information paper. So this is something practical that I want to say. All these discussions that we are having, it has in an ideal, or it have in an ideal context, go to a cabinet of ministers to discuss. So I have been editing and trying to put together a cabinet information paper. First of all, trying to aggregate the information. As much as I've used all the brevity I'm supposed to use in the military context of my training to make it short, I'm still over 16 pages or 20 pages. So you just imagine presenting to the president that, sir, there's a cabinet information paper on decarbonization, and to advise us what position we should take ultimately at the IMO. And it is already 20 pages of paper. In that cabinet decision space, there is a minister of energy in who is investing every day in hydrocarbons. And this morning, if you read the news from Ghana, the president have again renewed or allowed the energy companies to an extended period to explore energy resources, hydrocarbons, critical for the national economy of Ghana. The president is virtually sitting down, calculating with his finance minister how much money we still have to get in the last couple of years, in the next couple of years from what? Hydrocarbons. He's investing in that. The destiny of his country and his people is hinged on that. There are 35 million of them. Their health, the same health that we are talking about, so it's a trade-off issue. Their food, the sea defense that they need, and Professor Polo has been talking about this, all is dependent on their revenue. The president decarbonize. Then the Minister of Trade will be in that cabinet. We depend on port for substantial part of our revenue. And so I want to say the Minister of Trade for a lot of our goods that are coming in. In the short term decarbonization, what will be the effect? Will it affect imports? Will it affect prices, goods and services in the country? Perhaps yes. How will he handle this alongside the Minister of Green Transition, who has been given the mandate by the same president that you are the Minister for Climate Change, lead us towards climate change? They all have to make this particular decision. The Minister of Foreign Affairs have to deal with the fallout effect of the decision at the IMO. Partners that have been courting and moving with us for a long time, partners that have committed, conducted demarche at the government, and ultimatums that have been issued, partners in the other south that are also hydrocarbon producers. So it is simply a very complex issue of discussion. And all this has to be brought and discussed. So I call it here, there, but not here. The reason I say that is that although all these discussions are happening at the IMO, at the academia, and everywhere, when it comes to the table of cabinet, it's a very complex decision to make at the level of cabinet. And unfortunately, at times, those people who are supposed to make such a decision haven't been involved in the discussions for a very, very long time. And that is where, and perhaps are never involved in the discussions, and they have to make the decision. So wherever we look at it and however we look at it, it's a very complex issue. For example, the last speaker just mentioned coastal communities. We need to decarbonize perhaps the 3-4% of shipping for the sake of coastal communities. We perhaps need, but let's accept it that global shipping is perhaps just 4-5% maximum. Where's the rest of the 95%? Why are we not talking about that? Why is the global community so much about the 5% in global shipping and not the rest? But let me also say it, that the coastal communities, again, are those that are not into farming in my country, Professor Paulo will tell you. So when you look at it on the whole, it's a very complex issue. They tend to depend on imports. If you come further land in my country, at least people will not have the knock-on effect of that high when global prices increase as a result of decarbonization. So another complex issue. You're trying to solve the problem for the coastal communities, but yes, the coastal communities are also what? Import dependent as compared to the further inland communities who can at least take the shock by not depending on all the comfortable imports and depending on what they eat. So very complex issue when you have to assemble all this and put it before a cabinet and you say, "Sirs, can you make a decision on this particular issue?" I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamal. There's something that just keeps on repeating itself throughout this discussion. I remember when Anita was sharing, she was like, it's more than everything that you're looking at. I just picked a few things to share. And I think it just shows that this terrain that we call the ocean space, as expansive as it is, and we can see it's endless. Once we look at the ocean, it's endless. The connecting problems to the ocean that has to do with human beings and ocean biodiversity, etc., is also complex. And I think, for me, every time I go to Africa, and because I've done a couple of workshops in Africa, when we talk about this, everybody just like behaves like they want to give up. And they say, it's too hard, it's too complex. And they ask the question, where do we start? And my response to them is very simple. How do you eat an elephant? We need to start somewhere. You have your expertise, you have stuff that you can do today. I promised myself that I will not use, this was just my commitment in the past couple of months, that I would not use single-use plastic. Because I watched something on Netflix called Seaspiracy, and I cried. And then I've watched the Sir David Attenborough, I cried as well. And I'm like, I don't want to be crying anymore. Let me just do something. So my question to all of us here is, what can we do? Pardon?
Go vegan.
Go vegan. There you go, so go vegan. Yes. Yeah, go vegan. And unfortunately, we have come to the hour that we're supposed to end this conversation. I think it's partly because we didn't start on time because we were waiting to settle down. But before I pass the mic back to Pastor Peters, and it's this one thing I love about collaboration is you can see different sides of either a triangle or a square or a rectangle. I would have loved to ask a lot of questions, but if you permit me, Pastor Peters, I just want the audience to ask the panel at least 2 questions, if you have. If you don't, I'll just ask them to give us 1 minute each of something. And I have something in the back for you, by the way, it's a question. But if you have any question at all, the fact that you're still here shows that you're really engaged and you're enjoying this, and you care. If you have any question, please, can you just indicate by show of hands? Okay, wonderful. Who else? So 1 question. Can you please give to the gentleman on the back? Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
My name is Hamid Abdulkarim.
You're welcome, sir.
I'm with the Nigerian Meteorological Agency in Africa.
You're welcome, sir.
When we talk about the nexus between health and climate change, I believe there are a lot of things to be looked at. In Africa, for instance, everyone is conversant with certain diseases coming up at certain seasons of the year. And it is mainly aggravated by change in weather. When we look at climate change holistically, we cannot but stop looking at the microscopic or real-time weather that tends to give rise to a number of these diseases. I want to take meningitis, for instance. It is associated with high temperatures, and that is during the dry seasons in Africa, at least in the sub-Saharan Africa. What can we do? There is need for effective awareness creation among the populace, such that at the onset of such seasons, a lot of people can begin to get prepared to take caution, to take certain actions, because this conference holistically is about actions. So when we now look at the coastal areas, there's cholera, there is